Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming out this morning. It's always a pleasure to talk about the work that our community partners are doing with the Cootes to Escarpment EcoPark system. My goal this morning is to give you a bit of an update on progress on the entire initiative and also to highlight things we're up to right now in terms of community stewardship, which are getting underway after a lot of planning. The Hamilton area, including Burlington of course, is one that is both remarkably diverse in terms of its culture, intensive in terms of its industry and development, but remains remarkable in terms of natural heritage features. Cootes Paradise Marsh in the Dundas Valley is a centerpiece for our community, and in working with partners around the table, the conservation authorities, the City of Hamilton, City of Burlington, and so on, over the past several years, Royal Botanical Gardens has been proud to be involved in developing the Cootes to Escarpment EcoPark system. Dundas Marsh, or Cootes Paradise Marsh, is a Great Lakes coastal wetland. It's one of the last remaining big ones that's available, and it sits remarkably undisturbed, although it is a degraded marsh in many ways, surrounded increasingly by urban development. Here you can see the west end of the wetland with the edge of the McMaster University campus, subdivisions around the town of Dundas and so on, and an awful lot of green space around it yet. A very important ecological corridor in our area exists between the Niagara Escarpment and the wetland itself. This ecological corridor was recognized over 20 years ago when there was an OMB hearing process about development in the Pleasant View area, and that process resulted in the ruling that private land developers could develop some of the property, but only as very large estate lots, and they've not chosen to do that since. In trying to emphasize and understand this area, which is the only ecological corridor between the Niagara Escarpment and a Great Lakes coastal wetland that is not separated out at Lake Ontario by a 400 series highway, the organizations that have formed up this alliance called the Cootes to Escarpment EcoPark system have been looking at both natural and cultural heritage in our area very carefully. It's one of the richest areas in Canada for biological diversity. We've got 1,160 plant species growing wild at RBG alone, probably another 100 if you add in all of the properties around us that are natural spaces. It's habitat for more than 50 endangered species. Actually, there's quite a bit more than that now. We've had a review in the last year, and there are a lot of species at risk in the natural areas right around us. We have important bird areas, important areas for amphibian and reptiles, provincially significant wetlands, and areas of scientific interest and environmentally sensitive areas. I won't go through all the designations in this area, but it includes from the 19th century's protection of Cootes Paradise as a fish reserve, to the 1920s protection of the area as a game preserve and bird sanctuary, to being a national historical site, right up to inclusion of the Niagara Escarpment as part of the UNESCO World Biosphere and RBG's recognition as a nodal park in that system. We've been studying the wild diversity in the area quite intensely here at RBG. This is a little bit of sciencey goo, but the take-home message is that if you plot the number of wild plant species versus the area of a protected area in Ontario, you find Royal Botanical Gardens sitting way above the expected curve, way above the species area expected curve. The main contributor to this is a combination of multiple habitats in the same area, all bringing particular characteristic plant species, and also very intensive study over the past 50 or 60 years. We've had ongoing inventory work on our properties really since 1955. The area, though, is complex, and it's complex because of human development over the past couple of centuries. Some of these maps might be a little bit hard to pick out. Here's Hamilton Harbour. The red lines, of course, are there's Highway 403 going across here, Highway 6 coming down. And from the back, probably the one feature you can make out are the vertical stripes right through the middle of this aerial photo. Those are ravines. Those are protected remnant habitats, protected remnant woodlands. And some areas are still quite large and intact. The north shore of Cootes Paradise, for example, has a very large woodland, and there's intact woods along the escarpment. And when we take a look at where the plant diversity is found in our area, there are two peaks. One of them right along the talus slope of the Niagara Escarpment at Rock Chapel, and the other in the Grindstone Creek marshy areas just to the north of us here at RBG Center. These patches are the places where we have the highest remaining natural biological diversity in the area. The number of plants and animals that are on the endangered species lists that are in this area is pretty impressive in terms of both animals that are on the federal list and the provincial list, and they include a variety of plants, amphibians and reptiles, birds, and the one I always love pointing out, we even have endangered clams here. We have freshwater mussels. Ontario is, I think, not recognized by a lot of people, but it's a center of biological diversity for freshwater mussels. And so many of them are in trouble now because of the damage that's been caused to streams over the past couple of centuries by development. The natural areas around here, the wetlands, are home to some of the best remaining populations of freshwater mussels in Ontario. Of course, RBG is all about plant diversity and educating people about plants. And we're very fortunate here to have a really fascinating group of habitats. We've got remnants of prairies. We also have parts of the Carolinian zone protruding this far north and east. So we have about 50 adult red mulberries in this immediate area. That may not sound like a lot of trees, but there are only 200 in Canada left. This is our most endangered tree. And the big problem for this species is hybridization with a landscape plant called the white mulberry. White mulberry produces lots of little mulberry pollen that drifts off into the remnant forest areas, hybridizes with the red mulberry, and we find a lot of now resulting hybrids in the landscape. Of course, from the perspective of endangered species recovery, what we're focused on is protecting the native germplasm, the genetic diversity that's native to our area, and those hybrids don't count. They're not part of the protection of that natural legacy. Another one that we're very proud of at RBG, as an example of an endangered species in our area, is the few-flowered clubrush, or Trichophorum planifolium. The few-flowered clubrush is found only along the shores of Cootes Paradise in Canada. This is the only spot this species has left. There was a population in Rouge Park. It's disappeared in the last 5 years. Because plants like this are on our endangered species list, we actually have regulated habitat around here. There are patches of habitat specified in the Endangered Species Act as being protected. And some of that very close to urban areas, right along trails, right up against and adjacent to McMaster University, for example. So trying to come up with a way of working with all of our partner agencies in protecting natural habitats in our area, one big striking part of that is understanding the degree to which the landscape is fragmented. We do have large patches of forest left, but it seems to be a characteristic of our species that we like to cut them up into smaller pieces. And so in our area, there are those vertical stripes that you could have seen on that earlier photograph, which represent the forest and intact habitat areas around streams and ravines, patches of habitat and open space around the Niagara Escarpment and Cootes Paradise, and there's also areas which are parkland, protected land, or open space and parks, which can be valuable habitat for some species, even if we don't think of them that way normally. For example, does anyone recognize what that patch of land sticking out into the harbor is? Yes, exactly. It's the big cemetery that's right out here behind us. Well, that's a cemetery, and it's very heavily and intensively landscaped. It's also a great place to see owls. And there's a species that lives right along the shore here called the hoary mountain mint, Pycnanthemum incanum, the only place in Canada you can find that plant. It's a remnant prairie species, and it's in a cemetery. So there's ecological value in a lot of this landscape as connectivity, as green space, some of it as very intact natural habitat. But when you take a look at the bigger picture and ask who's involved, one of the complications that comes up right away is that there's a lot of players. RBG is on this map as the buff-colored areas, but we also have City of Hamilton property, City of Burlington property, Conservation Authority properties, and others in our immediate area, but all are part of this complicated but really interesting mosaic or quilt of natural and open space. Now, I'm an ecologist, and I'm really trying to understand the function of these areas from the perspective of other species. How can they use this space? What do they do in it? And what patches are big enough to support populations of endangered species or other species of interest? A consequence of building, a consequence of creating parks and cutting things off and filling in the spaces around them, though, is what ecologists call relaxation. And what we're experiencing now is a loss of wild species because the patches of habitat are getting smaller. This doesn't happen simultaneously. It takes time to lose individual taxa. Over the past year, our botany intern here at RBG undertook a study of the Rock Chapel Nature Sanctuary on the north side of Cootes Paradise, between Cootes and right up to the Escarpment. And she found that there are 19 plant species in that nature sanctuary that have disappeared over the past 30 years. We know we are losing species, even in the protected areas. And it's because wild species of plants and animals don't like living alone in small patches of land. We have a kind of a nice, interesting term for that in ecology. If this graph represents time versus species richness or number of species, an intact habitat might start off with a particular number of species. Once it's fragmented, we start losing species, and the species richness will come down to a new equilibrium level. The process of this decline in species richness is called relaxation. And the point where we are today is probably different from the point of the new equilibrium. The difference is called the extinction deficit. In a week when we're getting both provincial and federal government budgets, I would challenge you to think of the extinction deficit, which is what we are facing. We are losing species. They're not all gone yet. But because of the basic biology rooted in ecology and a concept called island biogeography, parks lose species. It's a function of them, unfortunately, unless there's intervention, unless there's management. And so, starting about 2006, a group of agencies got around the table to ask, how can we fight the fragmentation? How can we do a better job of managing our natural lands together, not as a single park, but as a group of participating agencies as an alliance? How can we solve common problems? Can we work together to ask questions about land securement, finding additional funds to protect new lands? Can we work on communications, on endangered species, invasive species, all these things together? And the group of organizations on this slide really are the ones that have made this happen. The Bruce Trail Conservancy, Conservation Halton, the City of Hamilton and McMaster University, Halton Region, the Hamilton Naturalist Club, the City of Burlington, and the Hamilton Conservation Authority are all agencies with the Royal Botanical Gardens that own open space, parks, natural areas in the immediate area. And so in 2007, we were fortunate to get funding to start working on this process of asking how to do it. We had public consultations. We've been employing registered planners throughout our work, and I have to embarrass Deborah Herbert in the audience here. Deborah is the coordinator of our program, has been for the past 5 years. We always work with people who really have the understanding of planning, because that's how things get done around the table. And we've had the wonderful support from both the Ontario Trillium Foundation and the Friends of the Greenbelt Foundation over the years in putting together a series of initiatives around keeping this group of different kinds of organizations together. It may sound like a simple thing. We all have good intentions, but we speak remarkably different languages. And one of the big functions of bringing everyone around the table is to keep them around the table over time. And that takes time and it takes energy. But we have a unique opportunity to steward this area. It is critical, I think, to thinking about the future for Burlington and for Hamilton, and especially if you like the idea of rebranding Hamilton, getting away from the old steel town Rust Belt kind of attitude, and understanding that this place is remarkable. This summit is a remarkable example of the energy in Hamilton and our immediate area for organizations of all kinds to come together and talk and understand and share and maybe do new things together. We see a real vision of potential benefits to this area for the surrounding people, the people who have homes, the people who have businesses around this area benefit from having the parkland, the trails that Barb McKean just described in this immediate area. You don't have to go to Algonquin Park, although I love Algonquin Park, but you don't have to go to Algonquin Park to go to canoeing. You can do it in Cootes Paradise. You can see areas which are remarkable in their biological diversity and their cultural history right here in Hamilton. And when we bring the parklands and the natural areas of all these organizations together, it gets big. It currently amounts to about 1,900 hectares, or 4,700 acres of land owned by the partners. Now, there are some lands which are undeveloped in the area, and we have an active process to speak with those folks and see if there's any way that some of those lands could be protected in the future. We also have around us a lot of subdivisions and people with corporate interests, housed schools, hospitals, all these kinds of organizations that are part of the landscape. And we've been talking with them increasingly about what we call complementary stewardship. From the ecology geek perspective, I want to make sure these habitats are wonderful and rich for the turtles and the birds and everything else. But they're places where people are living too. And so our hope is that by working with the neighborhood, by working with the community, we can help support the natural areas by providing ecological connections between them. And that's what we really think about with complementary stewardship. A simpler version of the map just highlights the lands that are now owned by the partner agencies in the EcoPark system. A lot of this, of course, is kind of west of Highway 6 around Cootes Paradise itself, including the Burlington Heights, the North and South Shore, and a swath of land right up to the Niagara Escarpment and Rock Chapel, with lands owned by the conservation authorities and Royal Botanical Gardens. And to the east, more lands that are part of RBG's portfolio, but also the City of Burlington, the conservation authorities, and other agencies. So cutting across this map, you see these brown belts. Any ideas what those are? Anybody? Hydro 1 corridors. They're big open space. They're not only corridors for the transmission of power, but wildlife use them. And in some places, they're especially through the north shore of Cootes Paradise, there are areas which are quite exposed to people in their hiking experience as well. In 2013, the parties around the table said, okay, we've been talking, let's actually make this work, and we declared the EcoPark system in existence. Since that time, we signed a memorandum of understanding actually saying the EcoPark system is a real collaborative among these agencies. And since that time, we've been focusing on a whole range of projects, and I would invite you again to talk with me or with Deborah about this afterwards at your leisure. But we've made great progress. In the last 2 years, there's been about 100 acres added to the EcoPark system through a variety of means. We've had, for example, the York Road acreage in the Pleasant View area between the Escarpment and Cootes Paradise, where 52 acres was purchased by the Hamilton Conservation Authority in 2013. They still are working on a great campaign to protect the area and to purchase land. A fantastic gesture that same year was by Eileen and John Holland's family in Burlington, where the Holland family gave 37 acres of their own property to the city of Burlington. It's right here. A fantastic stepping stone to try to reconnect those patches of natural area. They gave that land to the city of Burlington on the condition that it be a park and that it be considered part of the greater whole of the EcoPark system. So one of our foundational ideas is that we're not giving up our ownership of our property. RBG isn't turning over its management to anybody. But as a collaborative, we have much greater chance of protecting the biodiversity and then working together on human use as well. Trails are a big deal in our area. We want people to be making use of trails. We have about 30 kilometers of trails at RBG. But if you've actually tried to walk from the Hamilton Conservation Authority areas to RBG, you might know that the trails don't quite connect. That's planning. That's sitting down together and asking, where is it going to go? How does it connect up? So a fantastic initiative over the past couple of years has been the development of the Hamilton-Halton Trails Council, of which the Cootes to Escarpment EcoPark system area is in the middle, but this is a much broader regional initiative that's just getting underway, and it'll be highlighted this year in June when McMaster University hosts the Ontario Trails Council Conference. So Google that. I don't have a slide on it, but Google that to find out more about the Trails Conference. Other highlights, more purchases or transfer of properties in the Halton area and in Waterdown Woods, and a wonderful leadership gesture by a citizen in Hamilton who has actually added her private property to the network through an easement. This is a legal document that gives the development rights for a piece of property over to an organization that promises not to develop. In this case, a half an acre of residential property on a ravine in Dundas is still owned by the family that has owned it all along, and it will continue to own it, or they can sell it if they like. But whoever buys it can't develop it. It will remain a protected patch of ravine in perpetuity. And that easement is held by the Hamilton Naturalist Club. Because the Hamilton Naturalist Club is part of this larger network, this is now the first sort of formal private piece of property within the EcoPark system. We're taking a look at stewardship outreach and how we can do a better job together to help others fight that fragmentation. And as I've mentioned, a big priority for us is working with landowners of all kinds, whether you're private people with a backyard or you're helping to run a school or a church, or whether you've got a large industrial property in Burlington or elsewhere, you probably have land. It probably has ecological function, even if you are not used to thinking about that way. So recently, the Friends of the Greenbelt Foundation have taken up our challenge to help us and provided us with funding for a program called Fostering Stewardship and Conservation within the EcoPark system. We have a full-time stewardship technician and a part-time land securement specialist who is helping us to make these connections. We're linked up to existing stewardship programs like the Conservation Halton Watershed Stewardship Initiative, and we're making some great progress. We've got workshops for the public that are available. We have public restoration events, for example, coming along from funded by other parties like the Great Lakes Guardians Community Fund. On our website, which I'll give you the address again at the very end, you can keep in touch with all of the work of the EcoPark system. We're doing communications through all of our partner agencies as well on stewardship initiatives, workshops, and public outreach. Some of the community stewardship events this year include forest restoration at Bridgeview Park. There's a native tree planting coming up in June at Nigel Charlong Park. Bayview Park in Burlington on the 19th of September, meadow restoration. At Kerncliffe Park, a pollinator corridor is being created by planting native species. In the fall, at Clapperson's Woods and also in York Road acreage in Dundas, programs to remove invasive species. So we're inviting the public and everybody interested to help us take a look at this landscape level understanding. Yes, it's really critically important to understand what you do on your property and how you can steward it. But you're connected to everybody else. Nobody is an island, and your properties aren't either. I'd like to leave you with a great model of this kind of initiative because I work extensively with other botanical gardens across North America. I loved this model when it came up at a conference last year, and I wanted to highlight it. Come on. Oop, I turned it off. Yeah, there we go. Called Connect to Protect. This is developed at the Fairchild Tropical Botanical Garden in Miami, Florida, where they're looking at a really difficult habitat stewardship issue. There's an endangered pine rocklands habitat in Florida that just sits in the southeast corner of the state, exactly under the footprint of the greater Miami area. Nearly all of this rare habitat has now been replaced by development. But there are still, I think, about 2% of the area of this habitat type left, including quite a few endemic species. And what the Botanical Garden did was to work with local landowners and other agencies on this Connect to Protect model. And what they've been doing is encouraging people to build their own gardens at home with species that are in harmony with this native habitat. And they actually provide the plant material to do this. So now all across the greater Miami area, there are 219 members of the Connect to Protect network. And they have a great system online that lets them plot just where all these stepping stone gardens are. So if you think back to the map I showed you with those big vertical stripes of habitat, I keep doing that, habitat fragmentation, what we're hoping over time is that from the perspective of other organisms in our landscape, they'll be able to hop across some of those developed areas from garden to garden and really be part of this complex and fantastic landscape in the city of Hamilton and Burlington. Thank you very much.